A hush falls over the big house as midnight approaches. 6 young white girls, aged over 18, huddle under embroidered quilts in an upstairs bedroom, whispering and giggling. At the foot of their 4-upholster bed lies a young black boy on a thin pallet, eyes wide open in the flickering candlelight. He dares not close them. At 16 years old, he is their enslaved servant for the night, ready to fetch water, stoke the dying fire, or endure whatever games the girls might demand in their sleepless excitement. When one girl snaps her fingers, he scrambles up instantly. This isn't an ordinary childhood sleepover. It's a scene drawn from the dark reality of American slavery, where even playtime could become an exercise in domination and cruelty. So, what used to happen at the sleepovers of the white girls who used black slave boys as their playthings? In this video, let's reveal this dark chapter of Black history.
The Black History Archives.
Growing up on a slaveholding plantation meant learning hierarchy early. White children were taught from birth that they stood above black people. In fact, enslaved people, even elders, had to address white boys and girls as master or mistress, titles asserting the child's authority. Failing to use these titles could invite punishment. One former enslaved woman remembered being beaten for calling a little boy by his name instead of master, because even a toddler's status stood above hers. This indoctrination started astonishingly young. In 1833, famed abolitionist Fanny Kemble observed her own 3-year-old stepdaughter proudly declaring, "I am a free person, Mary. Did you know that?" to an enslaved maid. The black servant could only reply, "Yes, missus, I know it is so here in this world." The message was clear. Even white children wielded power over black people simply due to skin color. Enslaving parents actively encouraged such attitudes. They often gifted their sons and daughters with enslaved children as personal servants and companions. These gifts were meant to instill lifetime loyalty, or rather, obedience, in the enslaved child, and to teach the white child how to be a master or mistress. However, on the surface, antebellum memoirs sometimes paint a quaint picture of interracial childhood play. Julia Dent, who later became Mrs. Ulysses S. Grant, fondly recalled growing up on her Missouri plantation with a retinue of black playmates. "We'd always had a dusky train of 8 to 10 little colored girls of all hues," Julia wrote, describing how enslaved girls her age accompanied her on outdoor adventures. Now imagine this routine during a sleepover, when the planter's daughter had one or several friends spending the night. One can picture the scene. Perhaps the girls decide to whisper stories long past their bedtime. The candle burns low. The enslaved boy on the floor fights off drowsiness, waiting for instructions. Suddenly, the girls get peckish. "Go fetch us some cookies from the kitchen," one says, dangling her feet over the bedside. The boy must navigate a dark house and the wrath of the cook to snatch biscuits for the young mistresses. If he takes too long or comes back empty-handed, he might be met with scolding, maybe even a slapped face or a threatened whipping by an overseer come morning. Tragically, when white children gathered together, their collective power over an enslaved child could lead to grotesque games. The innocence of a sleepover, the whispers, games, and dares took on a sinister edge when a black child was involved. In the cruel environment of slavery, even playtime could mimic the violence and domination that structured adult society. Antebellum accounts describe how enslaved children were sometimes roped into playing degrading roles for white children's amusement. A report on plantation life notes that slave children visiting the big house would be subjected to unfair games with the white children. For example, the white kids might pretend the black child was a criminal. They would clap him in an improvised jail, perhaps a closet or corner, and gleefully shout that he was locked in jail for being bad. In one recorded incident, a group of white children decided to play auction and actually tied up a younger black boy, pretending to sell him to each other as he cried, mimicking the very real slave auctions they had seen. Wilma King, a historian of slave childhood, relates a particularly brutal example. A young white boy tied 2 enslaved black children to a small cart and forced them to act as horses. He whipped them to make them run faster, treating them like live animals for a childish carriage ride. If a little boy could do that, one can imagine that little girls, while perhaps less inclined to overt violence, could be just as cruel in their own realm, ordering an enslaved boy to kneel and bark like a dog as a joke, or making him carry them piggyback until he collapsed. Indeed, former slaves recalled that white children sometimes treated them like play animals, riding on their backs or whipping them for fun in mock games of master and slave. Sometimes the line between play and punishment disappeared entirely. If an enslaved boy displeased his young mistress during the day, the girls at a sleepover might decide to teach him a lesson as a sort of sport. For instance, they might deliberately lock him outside on the porch in the dark as a prank, forcing him to shiver for hours. Or they could have him lie down and pretend to be a footstool during their ghost storytelling, each girl propping her feet on his back or legs, stifling laughter. Should he protest or flinch, he would be accused of disobedience. In the warped mirror of slavery, even children's make-believe had real torment in it. However, the sleepovers could take dark turns when the young white girls felt urges. A black boy slave could be called and made to play with them, unaware of where it would lead. In that moment of temptation and newfound thirst for pleasure, white girls often forgot it was forbidden for them to engage in intimate actions with the slaves. Perhaps that was because they were young. They would ask the black boy to act as if he were their husband or, more often, someone who wanted to use them. The whole dynamic was reversed, putting the temptation on the young black boy. White girls would come closer, touching him and ensuring he was ready for what twisted they had imagined. What happened next was no different than what white women used to do with their black male slaves. All of these young white women would use the young black slave for their fun. He was not allowed to get tired. He was not allowed to say no. Consent didn't exist, not for him. He wasn't seen as a person, but as a tool for their curiosity, their cravings, their games. The entire night belonged to them, and he was expected to submit to everything they demanded. Whether it was a glance, a touch, a command, or worse, he had to comply. He was not a guest at the sleepover. He was the entertainment. The white girls, daughters of slave owners, pampered and protected, would take turns inventing ways to provoke, tease, humiliate, and arouse him. They had heard stories whispered between older girls or caught fragments of what the adults did in the big house. And now they had their own black body to experiment on. They pretended it was a game. One dared another to kiss him. Another laughed as she made him undress just a little. They sat in a circle, asking him filthy questions, daring him to answer. They giggled as they touched him, pulled at his clothing, and watched his body react. And if he didn't react the way they wanted, they mocked him. If he reacted too much, they threatened him. There was no way for him to win. He was 17, maybe younger, sometimes older, but they held all the power. If he refused even once, they could scream and claim he touched them. In the morning, he would be hanging from a tree, so he stayed quiet. He did what they said. He played along. And the whole night would pass like that. The white girls, flushed with wine and power, took turns having fun with him, not caring that he was shaking, silent, ashamed. One would whisper in his ear while another tried to make him look at her exposed chest. A third would ask if he wanted her, and when he didn't answer, she would slap him and say, "You're supposed to want me." They didn't see him as a boy. They didn't see him as human. They saw a fantasy, a fetish, a slave. And behind the bedroom doors, their imagination had no limits. This wasn't about sex. It was about domination. They had grown up in a world where black people were furniture, livestock, and playthings. They believed they had the right to use him, not just his labor, but his body. The whole night would pass like that, where the white girl would think of all possible ways they could use the black boy and get every kind of pleasure they had heard about. What do you think? Should this chapter of black history be taught in schools? Isn't it true that the twisted form of pleasure which white women and girls used to gain back in slavery days is embarrassing for white people today? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on whether this continues to this day, where white women and girls prefer black men and boys, even if they don't confess this. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.